Hello, welcome back to the Grape Explorer and welcome to 2021, a year which cannot possibly at all be worse than the last one. Fingers crossed. If you're having a big celebration this year, whether it be a birthday or an anniversary, you might be thinking about giving wine as a gift. And I thought it might be fun today to go through a few previous vintages to give you an idea about which regions performed really well, and if you are thinking about buying a gift, what type of bottle you might be in the market for. If you're new to this channel, welcome, I'm the Grape Explorer. On this channel you'll find all things wine related, particularly wine education. So if you're interested in wine, consider subscribing. So what I've done is I've collated a bit of information about some previous vintages that would fall upon a special anniversary or a significant birthday, and we'll go through these one by one. Now here in the UK, the legal age for drinking is of course 18, so I'm starting off with someone who's celebrating an 18th birthday this year. That means that they would have been born in the year 2003, so what was the vintage like that year? Well, in Europe, it was an exceptionally hot year, which means we've got some really great wines you're going to be able to find. Bordeaux and Sauternes especially had a really good year, as well as Burgundy and the Loire Valley. Over in Italy, you're going to find some fantastic expressions of Chianti, and in Germany and Austria, they produce some very good wines as well, with that hot weather circulating throughout Europe. Port had a small but exceptional vintage year where a vintage was declared. And then outside of Europe, for California, Australia, South Africa, they all enjoyed good rather than exceptional years. So if you're thinking of getting a gift for an 18-year-old, look to European reds especially, as well as some of those ports and Sauternes that you're going to be able to find. Lots of choice available, and of course because it's the 2003 vintage, it means there's a lot more wine that's accessible and therefore potentially affordable. So let's move on to another significant milestone, and particularly if you're going to be of drinking age in the United States where the legal limit is 21, what did the year 2000 look like from a vintage perspective? Well, this would be considered very much a contrasting year globally. It was considered legendary in Bordeaux, although Burgundy didn't quite hit those Bordeaux heights, and yet it was still very good. The wines of Alsace in France are also very good. Moving over to Italy, if you're looking for something like Barolo or Barbaresco, they enjoyed a spectacular year, although expect those wines to be relatively expensive. And again, in port, this was declared a vintage year 2000, so many of these wines are going to be drinking for decades to come, and actually would be a pretty good idea for a gift. Another winner was Tokai, those Hungarian sweet wines, where they enjoyed a fabulous vintage as well. However, as with the previous slide, it wasn't such a great year in the New World, with the USA and Australia suffering from a somewhat lackluster vintage. So again, you need to be seeking out some of those European wines if you're looking to treat someone for their 21st birthday. Although I would take port into account there, with it having the potential for aging, and it's a bit more affordable, a bit more approachable, and obviously that's going to be something that could be enjoyed for years to come. Now, if you've got a special anniversary this year, the next step is 25. That of course is a silver wedding anniversary, and that means it's the 1996 vintage, where Champagne enjoyed a historically good year. Overall, this was a fantastic year for some of Europe. Bordeaux yet again had an incredible vintage for both dry reds and whites. And Burgundy also compared as an excellent year this year, with the Côte de Nuits doing very well. But like I say, Champagne is where this is considered a fantastic vintage for the ripeness and acidity of the fruit at the time. And in Italy, Piedmont also enjoyed a dazzling year, so again you can be looking at some of those Barolos for example. Germany, Austria and Spain were all considered good but not great, and port had a poor year. You might want to consider avoiding that. And then outside of Europe, California and Australia offered some solid options, but against Europe's best could not compete. So if you're thinking about something to purchase which could be drunk now, look to Bordeaux, Sauternes, Burgundy or Barolo. And like I say, some of those champagnes are still available from the 96 vintage. I've put links down where I can for many of these vintages, just to give you an idea about what's available. They're not recommendations. I haven't been able to taste these wines, of course, but it just gives you an idea about the type of price you can look to. And I'll also put some links in there for the champagnes from 96 as well, to give you an idea on pricing. But from 25 years, we now move on to 30 years, 1991. So what were the vintages like that year? Overall, 1991 is considered not great. However, there are going to be a few notable exceptions. Bordeaux and Burgundy both had terrible early spring frosts, which struck much of Europe, and actually Burgundy and Bordeaux didn't really recover after those spring frosts. So if you're looking for something from France, the Northern Rhone is going to offer the best drinking from the 91 vintage. Whereas if you move into the New World, you're going to get that bit more choice. California and Australia both produced some excellent reds that year. And in particular, Napa produced some really good Cabernet Sauvignon, and Sonoma produced some really good Merlots. Port also enjoyed a very good year. But overall, the feedback is for 91, stick to those New World wines. So something from the US, something from Australia. It's going to fare and will have aged a lot better than some of those European wines. So that's 30 years. We're now going to be moving decade by decade. We're moving into 40 years and 1981. Now, the 1981 vintage ranged in quality. Bordeaux, Beaujolais, the Loire, Alsace and the Rhone Valley all enjoyed some good years. Though Champagne, not good in this year, neither was Sauternes. And avoid Burgundy, where it was acknowledged to be a poor year in 1981. Piedmont in Italy also suffered a bad year, so look out for wines from Tuscany, which actually did really well. Spain, Germany and Austria had good but not great years. California enjoyed a good year and Australia did not enjoy a good year. So you've got to be really mindful that we're starting to get into older wines here as well, wines that are 40 years old. So you really need to start thinking about doing your research if you're going to be getting someone an anniversary wine that's 40 years old. Really start to think about the producer from that year, what was the region like that year. There's a lot of consideration that's going to go into this, particularly if you're thinking of opening the bottle. Now, some people might just want to have a bottle as a bit of a keepsake from the year that they were born, but if you're thinking about drinking it, you're going to have to go and do a bit more research, particularly as we start to go even further back now to 1971, an incredible 50 years ago. This is where some of the information I was able to collate wasn't as readily available, particularly in the New World. It was a lot easier to get some European vintage reports. But 71 was considered a great year for Bordeaux, with Sauternes and Barsac also doing very well. The Italian vintages were also superb, with both Piedmont and Tuscany delivering, and champagnes are still available from this vintage. And like I say, where I've been able to find wines, I have linked them down below just for you to go and take a look at, see what's available. So that's 71, and we're going to keep moving back every 10 years now to 1961 and 60 years ago. So in 1961, Bordeaux was considered to have bounced back following a very poor 1960, and something that's considered a truly legendary vintage, which I'm sure goes with some truly legendary prices. Great wines emerged from Pauillac, Saint-Julien, Pomerol and Margaux, and Burgundy also did really well, with some wines showing excellent and decent concentration. Piedmont and Tuscany were also stunning, and top Barolos should still be drinking really well now, although do consider these wines to be drinking well at a considerable price as well. And that's really going to be the story as we go further back here. The wines are obviously going to be that much more expensive. This was 60 years, we're now going to go to 70 years and 1951. It was considered an awful year for Bordeaux, one of the worst vintages in history, so if you're looking to avoid anything, avoid Bordeaux. The growing season itself was wet and cold, and it failed to improve when the summer finally did show up. However, you only had to go over to Italy, where it was a very different story, and they enjoyed a good year in Barolo and Brunello. And in port, it was a fair vintage, and there are still some single quinta vintage ports produced, so something to keep an eye out for. And I should just add that 1951 was the first year that Penfolds produced their Grange wine. And a bottle of Grange wine from that very first vintage in 51 sold last year for around £70,000 at auctions. So if there's someone really truly special in your life, that could be a consideration for a gift. But let's move even further back now to 1941. And the focus in 1941, unsurprisingly, was not wine as the premier concern for the world. There was a world war going on at that time, which means there's little information understood about these vintages around this time. There are naturally going to be very few bottles in circulation, so research here is going to be absolutely crucial. It's understood that good red wines were made in Bordeaux and Burgundy, and in Portugal the tawny ports that were produced are considered excellent, and a small crop of good quality ports were produced at that time. Finding wines, like I say, from the very early 40s and the late 30s is always going to be a challenge. So it's going to have to be something really special you'll need to seek out, and for someone very special in your life. And when we go back a further 10 years now to 1931, there was also another global issue that was affecting wine and the wine market. The history and world events dominated yet again, with the Great Depression having the biggest impact on the wine trade. Despite this, there was still a star of the vintage, and you will find that in port, where some outstanding ports were produced. Most of the surviving wines from that time are now likely to be too old to enjoy, but as I said earlier, they could still make a nice gift. You know, if you want to give someone something of a keepsake, a bottle from the year they were born is incredibly special, even if they don't consider opening it in the future. It's still a really nice thing to have, and I think that's just nice to be able to share something that was created the year that someone was born. I just think that's a really nice way for you to learn a little bit more about the year that you were born. But finally, we're going to look at 1921. We're going to go back a full 100 years. The 1921 summer in Bordeaux was unusually hot, with some vines even suffering heat stress. And as is often the case, the very best chateaux in Bordeaux, the very best estates, performed really well. What's interesting is the German vintage. There's plenty of information available here. It was one of the largest of the century, creating an abundance of fruit, and was hugely popular, selling fast. The port vintage wasn't successful and actually went undeclared. They didn't call the vintage that year. And again, many of the top wines from this year are going to be either difficult to find, expensive, or really both. Difficult and expensive. I know some people like that, difficult and expensive. So there we go. There's looking back on 100 years of vintages, as we talk about anniversary wines in 2021. I hope if you have a special occasion for yourself or for somebody this year, it's given you that food for thought, and I'd be really interested for you to share with me some of the wines that you've enjoyed on special occasions and the sorts of things that you would look out for if someone wanted a wine like this in a special year. As I say, I've linked down a bunch of products down below just for you to get a feel for what is available out there. I haven't tasted them or tested them myself, but it's just a link to give you some information. As for today, that's all I've got for now. I hope you have a really prosperous 2021. I hope as you go through the year you get to taste some fantastic wines, and I'll see you again soon. Cheers.